Hafide, and welcome to The Hub, where America's stories begin. Peace is required. That was the point of a speech Dr. Robert Underwood gave to a group of Rotarians. The former congressman and former University of Guam president, now the chairman of the Pacific Center for Island Sustainability, sharing the state of our island's relationship with the military.
Mr. Underwood is an American politician and educator who served as a delegate from Guam to the United States House of Representatives from 1993 to 2003 as a member of the Democratic Party. He subsequently served as the president of the University of Guam from 2008 to 2018 and is currently a co-chair of the United States Institute of Peace, China Freely Associated States Senior Study Group. Fellow Rotarians, please join me in welcoming Dr. Underwood.
Sidus Masi, Ben, thank you so much. It's a privilege and honor to be with you just to share some ideas. My stint at the U.S. Institute of Peace was actually just to prepare a report on the COFA treaties, which were being underway at the time. And actually, I co-chaired that effort with the former Indo-PACOM Command, Admiral Davidson. And Admiral Davidson, Phil Davidson, is most often known as the person who thought up the Davidson window. Now, the Davidson window predicted that there would be conflict, maybe conflict in 2027 between China and the United States over Taiwan. These days, that thinking has been put entirely out of focus. But I did work with him. So I'm glad to talk to you a little bit about peace, and the title of my talk is Peace is Required. Peace is not something that you just, as had been stated by Mahatma Gandhi, it's not just the absence of conflict, it's something you have to work towards. And right now, Guam is entirely on a war footing. I mean, look around you, look, we have to cope with Cope North. I think, well, maybe the best way to look at Cope North is how are we coping with Cope North? Other than the fact that it's bringing a lot of military attention and maybe, people are staying in the hotels, but actually what is the meaning of this whole exercise in our lives as islanders? From Washington, D.C., we are viewed from a telescope. And attention, this telescope has no attention to the nuances of our lives on ground or the kinds of things that we have to put up with, and which would ultimately change military planning. I mean, the planning is there, and then it doesn't really pay attention to the details here. The details here are things that they just have to kind of work their way through, but it's not really going to have a direct effect on military planning. I had a conversation last week with retired Lieutenant General Chip Gregson of the Marine Corps. And he says, Robert, I'm so glad you're talking about your islands because it's the flyover. It's the flyover islands. Between North America and Asia, they're always involved in back and forth, and then your islands are just being used as sort of pawns in this game that are ongoing, and whether you are actually involved in it or not. And so when there's planning for potential conflict, geostrategic competition goes from Washington, D.C. to Honolulu, and then to complicated arrangements with Japan and Korea and Taiwan, and now the Philippines and other nations. But like the proverbial flyover country in the United States, where the East Coast and the West Coast fly over the middle of the country and don't pay attention to it, we're those flyover islands. We're in the middle of an intensive military buildup. There are 5 nuclear submarines stationed here, 5 attack submarines. We have the first new Marine Corps base built since the 1950s. We have the largest munition storage and petroleum and fuel storage in the entire U.S. Air Force inventory. We have massive munition storage and again, oil and petroleum reserves for the Navy. And the bonus is that they're planning what is called an enhanced integrated air missile defense system for Guam, which is going to cost billions of dollars. We're being groomed for conflict in response to an uncertain and changing threat assessment. Originally thought it was going to be as close as 2027, a kinetic conflict, a real-life conflict over Taiwan, but has been now moved to the next decade and hopefully never happens. And even my conversations with officials from Taiwan have moved that away, and they should be the ones that are most concerned about it. While the geostrategic competition is real, don't make no mistake, there's real competition between China and the United States. The military threat resulting from that is always changing. It's never quite certain. Our role in the flyover is alternatively called the Guam Cluster or the Marianas Cluster of bases and facilities to deal with war. These bases now include Tinian and Palau and Yap in a system of bases in which they are planning to divert and disperse their resources in case of actual conflict. Guam has shifted from being the tip of the spear. Now, the tip of the spear means that you project power into Asia, project power into real conflict, and we have shifted from being the tip of the spear, the venue for projecting U.S. power into real-life conflicts like has occurred for decades, like Korea, Vietnam, and some smaller conflicts. But now we are actually the first strike community. We're the community that's going to be struck first in case of a conflict. So that we're now part of, and now we're being described as being part of the U.S. homeland, which has never been used before as a rhetorical or explanation about the basis, right? So now there has been a great deal of rhetorical justification using this logic of being the U.S. homeland for the construction of this massive air defense system as being necessary since Guam is part of the U.S. homeland as opposed to just being a base for military activities. These offensive operations that have occurred historically out of Guam now need defending because Chinese assets can actually get here. There's much room for conversation in trying to break all of this down. It's hard. It's not easy. It takes a lot. You have to pay attention to all the nuances that are being said. Are we being asked to alter our lives significantly? And whether we're being asked to accept the promise of a 360-degree air missile defense system seriously? Is that really possible? Is there such a thing? And if it does say what it does, what is it possible? And if it's true that you could set up a missile defense system that would protect from incoming Chinese missiles, why do you need divert airfields? Why are you in a rush to say, if in case a missile attack comes, we're going to put our resources in other parts of the region? So right away, you have to kind of listen to the doubts that occur in all of this. And what about President Trump's new executive order, exploring, quote, an iron dome for North America? Now that's a kind of an air missile defense system as well. And he's contemplating that this should be built for North America. So what does that make Guam's iron dome? Are we a prototype? Are they going to take away resources from this prototype? What is Trump going to do? How does he conceptualize that? And in my conversations over the Iron Dome, and I've spent a lot of time methodically talking to think tanks as well as officials. And in one of my conversations last year, the complexity of this integrated air missile defense system, it's a really complex. It's like pretending like it's the Iron Dome in Israel. You've seen the Iron Dome when they get attacked by their neighboring countries? Well, that Iron Dome in Israel is dealing with relatively unsophisticated attacks. In order to build a concrete Iron Dome here, you're dealing with very sophisticated hypersonic missiles. And they could come from anywhere. They could come from China. The Chinese could come from behind, can come from the east. They could come from the west. You're not quite sure what they're doing. So, in this case, what is the actual trajectory of conflict? And will it actually work will it actually work? And are tactical nuclear weapons going to be used? Now, unless you're paying a lot of attention, there's now increased conversation about the use of tactical nuclear weapons in these conflicts. Now, a tactical nuclear weapon is a device that is not meant to destroy your enemy, but just destroy part of your enemy. And in this case, the assumption is the tactical nuclear weapon could be used over Anderson or could be used over Naval Station. And in my conversations, again, with people who do the wargaming, they said, Robert, you don't have to worry. Just don't live near a military base. I said, well, that's a little bit tough in Guam. It's a little bit hard to deal with that. And in anticipation of this, there's a rapid buildup in which there is legitimate concerns over environmental and cultural sites which are simply being subjugated to the impact of the development required. I was telling some of our friends here that, especially those of you who live in the northern or grew up in the northern part of the island, when I pass by Camp Blas, I feel like that whole area has been ecologically, environmentally raped because it was the rapidity of it. And then we find out that the Marines, they don't even want to be here. The Marine Corps Commandant said a couple of weeks, the Marines, we don't want them to be in Guam. We want them to be closer to where the potential action is. Conceptually, the Marines are the 911 force of the United States. And then they're the 911 force of the United States, and they're 2,000 or 3,000 miles away from the action. They can't be that 911 force. But anybody who's paid attention to Marine Corps movements have known historically that the Marines have never really been in favor of this move. So what should we do as a result of all this? We have housing issues in planning for contractors. The Singapore Air Force is going to station a squadron here. The Japanese Prime Minister Ishiba has talked about stationing Japanese troops here. So is the nature of the exercises that we're experiencing now going to change? Is it going to have a kind of an international dimension? There's a shortage of military base housing. They're all going into the economy. And so the ones at the upper end, they get the military housing allowance. They take the upper end of the housing market. We have, thousands of foreign workers, and they're not building barracks like they used to. They're staying in apartment buildings. And so now they're taking out the lower end of the housing market. And so where are our children? Where are our young families going to go? Now, what should we do? This is the part that is fascinating to me. What should we do as an island in this flurry of activity? What can we do? Can we really do anything? Can we push back? Should we require more? Do we work towards peace? The answer to all this, of course, is that we must, and I think it should be the purview and the responsibility of all elected officials, must work to protect our interests as an island society and as an island community, our economy, the fabric of our society, opportunities for young people. Many will argue that there's lots of transactional details, deals to be made, that there's a deal for construction of civilian facilities in exchange for cooperation with military planners. One would hope so, but I have to tell you that we really need to understand whether military planning has a certain trajectory, whether it has a guided missile approach to the future. Is the enhanced air missile defense system for Guam really a certainty? Is it being fully funded? We will know more in March as the increase of budgeting, the continuing resolution, which expires next month in Washington, D.C., about when the money is going to be spent. Will the missile system be fully funded, as argued by some people in conservative think tanks and by the chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, or will it be scaled back? They thought at first they were going to put 20 missile batteries here. Then it went to 16. Last week I heard it could be down to 10. So is it going to be scaled back? And how do we know? Who makes these decisions? And how are we supposed to react to them? And what are we standing for? That's the question that always bothers me. Will the missile system be scaled back in the midst of inter-service rivalry? You know, there's always a little rivalry between the Army and the Navy because the Navy has Aegis Ashore missile, anti-missile systems. The Army relies on missile batteries. The Army has no real presence in this part of the Pacific, so this is an opportunity for the Army to come here. So that's why we've seen a lot of Army generals recently, and why there's sort of excitement in the Army National Guard because they now have a bigger role. But in that rivalry, what is that decision? And is it going to be, is anyone looking at this? Yes, there's somebody looking at it. A congressionally mandated study by Lincoln Labs of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology was required to look at the efficacy and the viability of this missile defense system and to analyze all of the related issues on Guam, including housing and its effect on the economy. That report was finished last May. And has anyone in this room seen this report? Has anyone in the government of Guam seen this report? I don't know. I don't think so. And they won't release a scrubbed version of this report. So this report is already out, and it's already affecting how the military sees their options. But we don't know what it says, and apparently no one is asking for it. Well, we should ask for it. We should demand. They have information in there about the nature, the technical nature of this technological challenge. Well, that could be, you know, top secret stuff. You don't need to release that. But they also have a report on housing in Guam. Guam. I just don't think that's classified information. I don't think that's classified information. And that report is now, in another couple of months, will almost be a full year old. And it's affecting decisions that are being made in Washington, D.C. So, who do you root for? Yeah, this is always a question, you know. They try to present it in a different way sometimes, this discussion. Who do you root for in all this uncertainty? Some military planners will tell you, just root for the military planners. And the United States, if you don't root for them, and you don't root for their military planners, You are a naive dupe for the People's Republic of China. You're just some fool that doesn't see reality. But the reality I see is not very clear because their plans are not clear. Well, I'm not a naive dupe of the People's Republic of China, and I just cannot allow myself to turn over my trust to my island's future to military planners. It can't be. Do you just sit back and deal with all the fallout of being the flyover territory and hope for the best? Do you accept the promises and commitments of local commanders in the midst of these developments? Well, the first thing to understand is there's a dramatic lack of clarity from military planners. The threat assessment. The threat assessment went from imminent conflict in 2027 to now maybe 2030, 2035. So the threat assessment, the outcome of inter-service rivalries, the internal conflicts within the Pentagon. There's always a bunch of people in the Pentagon who say, we need more weapon systems. We don't need more Star Wars. That's not going to work. We don't know whether that system's going to work. We need more advanced weapon systems. And of course, their congressional budget realities. But in all of this, what really lacks clarity is that Guam doesn't know what it wants. There doesn't seem to be a coherent message. I'm afraid that that clarity doesn't exist. And the greatest immediate danger we face, we have no clear direction on how we want to deal with the housing crisis, which threatens the well-being of our young families. We have no plan on how to protect civilian populations in case of real conflict. Where are the shelters? We have no coherent land policy on what we will accept or reject or push back on air missile defense batteries. In this instance, I believe Guam should work for peace here at home, the peace of mind. That's the most important. Peace of mind about knowing who we are and how we protect ourselves. The peace of mind that we are giving future generations greater opportunities to live independent lives and have a shot at home ownership. We have heard that the best way to prepare for peace is to prepare for war, which is sort of opposite what Mahatma Gandhi said. At some level, that's true. But that's not the same as simply giving the military a blank check. Okay, you decide. Since you're in the preparation for war, you decide how we're going to live. What's the best thing for us? Full maneuverability in their activities on the island and simply accepting what they tell us, especially when they don't tell us the same thing year in and year out. So our organization, the Pacific Center for Island Security, exists to bring light to these plans in the Micronesian region, to analyze, to critique, and to spur thought and engagement. And at the end of this process, we hope to encourage that level of clarity about what is best for us and what is best for our region, and to work towards peace and opportunity. And so in that regard, I think we need clarity, we need critiques, we need analysis. So we're forming a cadre of people throughout the region to help develop these ideas. We're going to, of course, host conferences, but more importantly, we have already begun this process. We rolled out our first activity in Washington, D.C. last week at the Quincy Institute. We had meetings with all kinds of think tanks, very conservative, Heritage Foundation, American Enterprise Institute, very liberal, middle of the road, CSIS, also Hudson, Brookings, Carnegie. We are funded by Carnegie Corporation, so we're able to carry out these activities and hope to contribute to the mission of peace. And that's what we're about. And I think it behooves us as thinking citizens to become engaged in this process. There is no deal to be had if you don't know what deal you want. And I don't think we do.
Do you think Guam has become a first strike community? Keep watch as the military continues to roll out plans that seek your input about the potential impacts that come along with the buildup. Thanks for watching The Hub, where America's stories begin. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon.